Hi. Today we're going to talk about Acts chapter 17, and in particular how Paul presents the gospel to two very different people groups. We're going to see the things that he says to these two people groups that are different, and also the things that he says that are the same. Seeing how they're different will help us learn how to contextualize the message. Seeing how they're the same will help us learn what pieces are always non-negotiable as we talk about the gospel to people. So in Acts 17, Paul talks to two groups. The first group that we see is in Thessalonica, and it's in particular a group of Jews that gather in the synagogue. So these are people with a religious background similar to Paul's. They have the Old Testament scriptures which have prepared them for the coming of the Messiah. And they have language about Messiah, about the Christ, and expectations concerning him that Paul leverages to help them understand who Jesus is. The way he does it is he says, you know the scriptures and how the Christ has to first suffer and then rise. Okay? And he says, this person that you've been waiting for is Jesus. So that's what Paul says to the Jewish prepared people in Thessalonica, a religious community that has a similar background to the message that Paul's offering. When Paul talks to unbelievers, complete unbelievers, unprepared people, total pagans in the truest sense of the word pagan, in Athens he goes at it really differently, right? He talks about this God, this unknown God. They've got idols everywhere and gods to worship for everything. And there's one that's like the catch-all God. Is the God that you worship when you don't know who else to worship. And Paul says, okay, I know that guy. I know that God. That God is the one I want to talk to you about. He made everything, and he designed everything, both in the created order, but also in the way history unfolds, the way borders change and people groups move. He's unfolded this whole drama of the human experience so that we can kind of grope around in the dark and find our way to truth. He leverages their own poetry. There's two quotations of two different Greek poets that are not in the Hebrew Bible anywhere, and he takes these bits of like poetic reflection on how they're groping for truth, and he says, okay, I want to grab this unknown God that you say you don't know, and I'm telling you I know him. I want to grab this bit of poetry that you're referring to, that you use. I want to put these together and show you that I'm trying to teach you who this person is. He says that this God is commanding all people everywhere to change, to turn around, to stop going the direction they were going and to go in the direction of this God. And this God is going to judge the whole world by a man, a particular man that he has marked out as his special one by the resurrection. First, let me explain this word judge. In this context, it's less like thunder, lightning, comets, end of the world judge, and it's more measure. God has chosen someone who's going to be able to look at the world and say what's right and what's not, and remove what's not and make what's right all the way right, to make everything new. Okay? Of all the people who claim to know what they're talking about, who claim to have the authority or the ability or the wisdom to be able to make the changes in the world necessary to make the world an actually good place, only one of them has risen from the dead. God has only stamped one of them as, that's the one who can do it. Okay? And that's the claim Paul's making here. All right? And these two conversations, nearly everything is completely different, except for two things. In this conversation, Paul references the Christ, which is a kingship title. And he mentions that Jesus had to rise. So we've got Jesus is king, and Jesus is risen. On this side, you have the same things. Obviously, the resurrection. But also, who is a person that gets to measure, that gets to decide what's right, and then gets to remove what's not, and then gets to complete what's good? Who is the person who has the authority and the power necessary to do that? A king. Or at least a governing agency. Even if the word king doesn't appear, he's clearly talking about someone who has the right to rule. So when Paul talks to different audiences, he talks to them from where they are, not from where he is. But one place he always gets is that Jesus is king. And another place he always gets is that Jesus rose from the dead. Because of all the people who have made claims to be able to change the world and make it right, to be able to lead you and make you right, only one has God's stamp on him as risen from the dead. Okay? So that's it for today. Acts 17, contextualization, two different conversations, but in both conversations, Jesus